At the top of buildings across America and across the world, there are lowered flags tonight paying the greatest respects to Jimmy Carter, the humanitarian, the statesman, the president.
Minute of silence in memory of President Jimmy Carter.
From the halls of the United Nations to the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, today they pause to remember him. The former president, who in his later life was a Sunday school teacher, died Sunday afternoon, surrounded by his family in his hometown of Plains, Georgia.
He was an honest man. I think his legacy will be his honesty, his faith, and in politics, that's kind of rare today.
At the Carter Center in Atlanta, where the family is asking people to send donations instead of flowers, people are bringing flowers anyway.
He's my favorite president. Favorite president, for sure.
The next several days will give Americans who wish plenty of chances to share condolences. There will be public viewings in Atlanta and Washington, D.C., and a state funeral next week Thursday in the nation's capital, just 11 days before the inauguration of the next president, Donald Trump. Our current president, Joe Biden, a longtime friend of the Carters, will deliver the eulogy.
He was a statesman and humanitarian. And Jill and I lost a dear friend.
Jimmy Carter was a Georgia peanut farmer who never forgot where he came from, a man of the soil and of the New South who took on Washington.
As a candidate and as a president, I'll never tell a lie.
By January of 1977, he was president.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
His critics will argue that his presidency wasn't one of the greatest, with challenges at home and abroad. But there is much more agreement that his life after the White House was remarkable, building homes for the poor, through the Carter Center bringing fair elections and an end to diseases in places around the world. And his true partner through it all was his wife, Rosalind, who he often described as his secret weapon. She went first last November, and he will be buried next to her at a place they chose outside their home.
Jimmy says, "Oh, we're going to be buried right there." And then they're both smiling and saying, "Yes, I saw this beautiful bluebird." Rosalind said, "And I knew that that was a perfect place for us to be buried side by side."
Tonight, members of the family are taking comfort in this editorial cartoon in the AJC, the Atlanta paper. Jimmy and Rosalind Carter are together once again.
Their reunion, a bit of solace for the family tonight. And Steve joins us now from the Carter Center in Atlanta. And Steve, how soon will the broader public be able to pay their respects?
Well, Mary, the former president's remains will be moved on Saturday, and then he will stop at the State House here in Atlanta, then here at the Carter Center, where people can pay their respects. Then he will head to Washington, where there is a public viewing at the U.S. Capitol. Mary?
Steve, thank you. We move on now to the investigation into that devastating plane crash in South Korea. American investigators are now on the scene. The pilots declaring an emergency after a bird strike. The Boeing jet then coming down without its landing gear deployed. 179 people were killed, just 2 survivors. Investigators are now trying to determine what happened in those final moments before the crash. ABC's Britt Clennett in South Korea.
Tonight, a team from the NTSB joining South Korean investigators to try and figure out what led to one of the worst aviation disasters in history. The Jeju Airlines Boeing 737-800 coming from Bangkok cleared to land at South Korea's Muan Airport at 8:54 a.m. local time Sunday. At 8:57, the tower warns of birds in the area. 2 minutes later, at 8:59, the pilots call, "Mayday, mayday, mayday, bird strike, going around." Investigators looking at this image, appearing to show a flash and a puff of smoke, suggesting a bird strike. At 9:02, the plane makes contact with the runway with no landing gear down. 1 minute later, at 9:03, the plane crashing into that concrete structure.
We don't know what happened in those 4 minutes between when the crew declared an emergency and the crash itself. Why did they make the decisions that they made? Why land fast? Why land with the gear up? And why land so far down the runway they weren't able to stop the aircraft?
Jeju is a low-cost South Korean airline that has an impeccable safety record. The head of the airline bowing in apology. Anguished families flooding the airport. The youngest victim is just 3 years old.
There's a real somber atmosphere here, the tents which have been set up for the relatives, but sometimes the grief is so overwhelming you can hear wailing coming from them.
The only survivors, 2 flight attendants that were seated in the rear of the plane. A 33-year-old man telling doctors he doesn't remember being rescued. The other, a woman, reportedly in stable condition.
Mary, investigators are still combing through the mangled wreckage you can see behind me, and the black boxes are partially damaged, but the cockpit voice recorders, they'll also help piece together what exactly caused this crash. They'll also be looking at that concrete wall. Was it too close to the runway? Mary?
Still so many questions to resolve, Britt. Thank you. Here at home, we are tracking storms moving from the Midwest to the Northeast just in time for New Year's. Rain is expected in New York City around the same time that the ball is set to drop at midnight in Times Square. Several deaths reported following severe storms this weekend, including a powerful EF3 tornado touching down south of Houston. So let's get right to meteorologist Greg Dutra from our station WLS in Chicago. Hey, Greg.
Mary, it's another abnormally warm day across the Northeast and in New York City, and that can mean only one thing: rain, as we track our next coast-to-coast storm system. So let's do that. Rain arriving early in Chicago, and that is going to switch over to some snow, but it'll stay mainly rainfall south of Interstate 90 and a soggy Times Square right around to after dinner time. But there is some hope. The rain could slow to some drizzle right about the time the ball drops, and don't count out the cold air locked up in this system.